Hello and welcome to Views on News. I am Jawad Tehami. We are going to talk about India under Modi. What sort of a situation of human rights had been since the BJP, the Prime Minister of which is Narendra Modi, took over power back in 2014. They got re-elected back in 2019. Ever since Modi took over power, who has been dubbed as Butcher of Gujarat for the massacre in 2002 of the Muslims, and then the human rights situation and the kind of discrimination and marginalization the minorities in India, including Muslim, Christians, Dalits, as well as other groups have faced, has been unprecedented. Not only this, there had been blatant human rights violations also in Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir, especially after the revocation of Article 370 that gave special status to Kashmir. And this particular revocation was in contravention to the bilateral agreements with Pakistan on the disputed territory as per the United Nations. Also, the violation of international law, including the United Nations Security Council resolutions. Now, human rights groups have repeatedly urged upon Indian authorities to rectify their behavior within India and also in Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir. Not only this, Indian belligerent designs towards Pakistan also increased manifold over the years since 2014 in particular. Now, we have seen also false flag operations carried out by Indian authorities. They had been complacent, specifically when we talk about the Pulwama attack of February 2019 that led to the killing of over 40 personnel of the Central Reserve Police Force in IIOJK. And at that very moment, the Indian authorities, without any substantial evidence or any concrete proof, blamed Pakistan for that particular attack, which was of course refuted by Pakistani authorities. And now shocking revelations by the former governor of Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir, Satyapal Malik, who was governor at that time when the crisis happened between Pakistan and India. Now, there are certain voices coming from within India again about these revelations, and some are calling these revelations as massive, and some are also calling these revelations as indictment of Prime Minister Narendra Modi and National Security Advisor Mr. Ajit Doval. We'll take a broader look at what is happening in Modi's India, the kind of discrimination towards minorities and the kind of human rights violations in Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir, and the belligerent designs against Pakistan also, and carrying out of the false flag operations just to point fingers at Pakistan for being the perpetrator of cross-border terrorism towards India. Now, the Pakistan's Foreign Office regarding these revelations has called the international community to take cognizance of this particular serious matter. Let me bring in our panelists to talk about all these issues which are related to Modi's India. We are honored to have been joined in the studio by Mr. Air Commodore retired Basit Raza Abbasi. He is senior analyst. Mr. Abbasi, thank you very much for joining in. And we are also honored to have been joined by Mr. Amir Hussain. He is senior journalist. Mr. Amir, thank you very much for your time also. On Skype, we are being joined by Dr. Asma Shakir Khawaja. She is Executive Director, Center for International Strategic Studies, Azad Jammu and Kashmir. Dr. Asma, thank you very much for your time also, for being with us on Views on News tonight. We really appreciate that. Let me begin the discussion with you, Mr. Abbasi. Now, let's start with these revelations. How shocking these revelations do you think are, and what sort of a reality do these revelations depict about that very mindset which has been carried on with by the Indian authorities led by Prime Minister Narendra Modi?
I would like to say that it's truly an indictment of Mr. Modi in all these this maltreatment of minorities which has been taking place. Let me also say, since the program generally covers the whole gambit of change of situation from independence to now, India has moved far from the Nehruvian idealism to Modi's extremism. And the shift has been gradual, but it has crystallized in BJP's government. At least there was lip service previously, and a tacit recognition of minorities' right and the Indian responsibility to sort of, to some extent, include the minorities in the day-to-day running of Indian affairs. But Mr. Modi actually shunned all those ideas, and he rode the wave of BJP's extremism so successfully, both domestically and internationally. He's a bit fortunate also that in his tenure, the effect of the Mr. Manmohan Singh's policies actually started showing in his tenure, and he took all the credit for it. And India was really rising and shining in those years, but not because of Mr. Modi, but because of a very sensible previous Prime Minister of India, who was actually a technocrat, not a hardcore politician. And so he actually carried out that surgical operation of Indian economy, and it moved forward.
You were talking about Mr. Manmohan Singh?
Mr. Manmohan Singh. So on the back of those successes and the change of world perception towards India because of its growing economic might and the threat that they felt from China, especially US and China animosity, which has again has progressive, tremendously progression it has shown. So that all gave, domestically he was successful because of Hindutva policy, and internationally he got the support, especially after the debacle which the Americans faced in Afghanistan, when along with all their allies, they were not able to sort of overcome that ragtag army which was there in the Taliban forces. So now against China, they thought that there should be some, now after that experience, Americans decided that instead of directly intervening so obviously and so obviously, they would actually use someone else's shoulders. And somehow the other, in their perception, they think that India will be able to provide that perception. So these two factors have given them an unlimited license, given an unlimited license to Mr. Modi to do whatever he's wanted to do.
So Mr. Abbasi, as you already mentioned, let's talk about the local factor. If it was Mr. Manmohan Singh, who of course belonged to Congress,
yes,
if he brought that economic transformation, what led the BJP to get that very thumping victory back in 2014, again getting re-elected in 2019?
That was only
why was the public sentiment not in the favor of Congress?
Actually, only because due to the policies of extremism and their maltreatment and actually their will to crush the minorities totally. And there was no exception. The Christian churches, we all remember the priest who was burnt alive in a church incident, and many of those incidents. So it was very clear that India is for the Hindus, purely for the Hindus. Even Dalits, who are part of that religion, they have been made part of the general public. They cannot tolerate anybody. This is this exclusivity, the sort of not sort of eliminating all the heterogeneous elements of which are integral parts of Indian polity. So they targeted Christians, they targeted Muslims, they targeted Dalits, and they targeted Sikhs also. And if you noticed the might of India and the success of India internationally, that the BBC film, which actually put the blame squarely on Mr. Modi, was banned by India and domestically in India, and they also sent their tax authorities to sort of investigate a credible and powerful institution like BBC. And when the British Foreign Minister went to India after that incident, he very sheepishly mentioned that this doesn't seem to be fair. And the reply from their Indian Foreign Secretary was that India is run by the Indian laws, and we do it to the others, and we did it to BBC. So he was actually very clear that there is nothing wrong in this. So these factors, and you mentioned about the Mr. Malik's revelation. Mr. Malik was a trusted hand of Mr. Modi. That's why he was placed in a most sensitive area like Kashmir. And then we all know what he said, what he revealed, how he was actually asked to sort of hide the facts and let BJP sort of propagate those false lies and deception.
hiding the facts. Mr. Amir Hussain, now Mr. Satyapal Malik says that he was specifically asked by the Prime Minister Narendra Modi himself, as well as the National Security Advisor Mr. Ajit Doval, to be quiet about the kind of security lapses and the carelessness and incompetence which was shown by the CRPF itself and also the Home Ministry. Now, stopping the governor from speaking about it or mentioning these sort of elements regarding the security lapses, isn't it utter dishonesty to the public, or even that very vote bank which the BJP garnered over in the elections in 2014 and 19?
Yeah, you're right, because as Mr. Abbasi put it rightly, that the Indian regime, the Modi regime, is based on an image which has the regime has created an image for many years as a savior of Hindu Brahmanic ethical model, the old Indian ethics and all that. So I think this comes from this very idea of treating anybody who remain outside that particular circle as a traitor, and that's why anybody who is with the Modi and his fascist circle of politicians and elite would have to follow the orders and instructions coming from that particular powerful group, and that's why he was asked to remain silent. And this is not only about what we see today.
But what, Mr. Amir Hussain, that makes me curious to understand what sort of politics is this one? Isn't it an eye-opener for that very vote bank which believes in that very Hindutva ideology that India should be exclusively for Hindus and of course for the upper caste Hindus? Isn't it an eye-opener for them that their Prime Minister did the politics over the dead bodies of his own people and brought two countries, the nuclear armed neighbors, on the brink of war?
Yeah, you are right. But the populist politics is all about creating an image. He is a populist, an extremely right-wing populist, like a demagogue. The demagogues, the fascists, they create an image in the world and their own political entity in India. They are doing it for last many years. With the assassination of Gandhi, and after that, gradually they started to build an image that India is only for Hindus, the majority, and unfortunately, the democratic setup in India is based on any democracy is based on majority, and they use that majoritarian card to retain the power. And then there is a huge middle class. This is the beneficiary of Indian Hindutva politics, because they feel that they are protected under the corporate insignia. The corporate
so when you talk about democracy being set on very foundation of being a majority, okay, so when we talk about the population that constitutes the majority in India, Hindus are 80% already. Yeah. So what irritates them to have 20% other minorities?
Well,
I mean, they are already in majority, so what else do they want?
Yeah, there are two ways to do that. If a democracy is based on purely social democratic and secular traditions, then the political leadership will talk about the pluralistic and diverse India. But those who want to hold power and those who want to see that they will remain in power and they want an ideology which is hegemonic, the hegemonic ideologies usually use the majority instinct and the biases to rule the nations. And that's what the Hitler did. Hitler used anti-Semitic, anti-Jew ideology to rule Germany. He was a populist. So now Modi is following the dictates of Hitler and saying that the Hindu are the superior, the others are traitors who are the outsider, who invaded India, who came in, and they are now recreating the whole history, the history of a new history, which is a kind of artificial and mythical history. They're trying to create a history from nowhere to justify that. The Hindus are the indigenous and real people of India, and that's why. And then with that biases that they're building, they are also using the economic might to bribe in the middle classes, the media people. You know, Indian media will never see any big
I'll come to that
criticism.
point, Mr. Amir Hussain. The role and the responsibility of Indian media at this particular point in time, and these shocking revelations have been made by the former governor of IIOJK. Let me bring in Dr. Asma also into the discussion. Dr. Asma, what happens to be the responsibility of the international community, as the Pakistan's Foreign Office has urged the international community to take cognizance of these revelations, once again vindicating Pakistan's stance. And now by these revelations, it is quite established it was a false flag operation by Prime Minister Narendra Modi and his top officials to put blame on Pakistan to get that very electoral benefit. What should be done by the international community and especially the major powers?
Listen, this is really important, but you asked what Pakistan should do. In an ideal situation, and if the world is as democratic as the West claims, then Pakistan should not do anything but the world itself be conscious of what the former governor of BJP stated recently, that how can world leaders, they can digest that a political government in India put the life of billions of people living in South Asia on stake, and and the world, and just use this one thing as to justify to escalate the tensions to the level of the possibility of a nuclear war between the two hostile neighbors. This is unimaginable, and the damage would be uncalculatable. And the problem was that when Modi was doing all that, there was no escalation ladder, de-escalation ladder in place. He escalated the situation without any de-escalating strategy. And thanks to the rationality of Pakistan decision makers at that time, that things were averted and diffused because Pakistan chose peace over conflict or over gaining domestic appeasement by creating a wrong idea or boogie of the enemy. Otherwise, Modi, whatever BJP did after Pulwama attack is highly unacceptable, and this should not be repeated in South Asia. And I always question that how international community is securing the strategic stability of South Asia when a fascist radical regime under Mr. Modi is in power in India. And this one thing, when BJP governor's statement, that also indicates upon that how domestic politics of India is the basic determinant of its foreign and defense policies, and how Mr. Modi is using domestic foreign and defense policies for domestic leverages and benefits. And this is what makes the whole scenario highly dangerous. And world should realize that that how Pakistan is surviving in this dangerous and highly volatile equation. And world should not only rely upon the rationality of Pakistan's decision maker. It is time for the world to also create a deterrence vis-a-vis India, so that such thing never reoccur in future as well. And
so what about Dr. Asma, what about holding all those elements accountable which have been involved in this particular nefarious design? Is there any possibility, when we talk about the local factor, do you think the Indian system has got that very capacity to bring all these perpetrators to book and launch a sort of an inquiry or a probe into this particular incident and the revelations which are associated by one of the most important persons of that time when the crisis happened?
We should not forget that right now Indian Supreme Court or Indian courts are only releasing and acquitting those criminals involved in crimes against humanity, crimes against minorities, and crime against human rights. So Indian courts are right now not functioning to as a torch bearer of ethical value system, but they are functioning as a tool of BJP's regime to further or extend their political agendas. So I don't see, only international courts can do that.
So
Or
could there
international
be a
criminal court.
possibility of
Otherwise,
an international inquiry under the auspices of the United Nations?
Practically, I don't see any such possibility, unfortunately, because we have, there has not been any such example or precedent which international community would follow, because the biggest problem with international law and international humanitarian law is that it comes into action when the damage has been done. So unfortunately, right now, because the possibility of nuclear war was averted, but this tells us that how Modi regime, and I was thinking that as the BJP governor, former governor said, that vehicle with all that ammunition that was moving in Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir for 12 days. So I was thinking that was it an intentional decision by the Modi regime to let the vehicle move freely in the IIOJK and reject the request for an air transportation for those troops just to kill those people, those Indian soldiers, so
that pretty
Modi
much
can
shows there
have
was a well-planned, orchestrated false flag operation just to put blame on
Exactly.
Pakistan. Right, let me
Exactly,
bring in
because in the
Mr. Abbasi.
presence-
Mr. Abbasi also into the discussion. Mr. Abbasi, any possibility of any sort of inquiry or a probe to look into these revelations locally? Or if not, if the Indian system doesn't have that very capacity, as Dr. Asma has also mentioned, that the judiciary over there seems to be biased also. So any possibility of an inquiry at the international level under the supervision of the United Nations in particular?
I agree with Dr. Asma that I also don't see any possibility of that happening. Why? Because when those crimes against humanity were taking place and it was in the visible daylight, the international community just sat tight and watched. So now that they are lying far behind us and just an Indian has raised a voice, it doesn't I don't think it's strong enough to sort of wake up that sleeping conscience of international community where their interests are
When
predominant.
will it wake up?
Don't see that.
Is it waiting for some sort of catastrophe to wake up?
Actually, that catastrophe might take place in near futures, because the increasing pressure and the increasing sort of propaganda about China, which is taking place in most strongly from the US and their allies. I don't think it's happening. And when you talk of international community, United Nations organization, the more potent body of this organization is the Security Council. And there are many people with their vetoes to sort of veto. If you remember, the Kashmir resolutions were initially all vetoed by the Russians. And now Indians are darling of the Americans. And they have no love lost with Russia. So, no, I don't think there's any remotest possibility of that happening. And Madam also talked about the sort of subservience, in Supreme Court subservience to Mr. Modi. I would say it's not only the courts of India, it's the sort of judiciary is one, media is one, and academia other. They have all, and right now, even the Indian presidency, which has always remained apolitical, and I'm coming back to Mr. Malik's revelations, that he had a scheduled meeting with the Indian president, and that was cancelled by whom? Prime Minister's office. So that is the sway of Mr. Modi on all the institutions of a democratic country. So India is a democracy only because it votes. It has sort of silenced all the institutions. It has made them subservient to Mr. Modi's policy. And I would say that all these institutions are only following Mr. Modi's dictates.
So
No fear, no threat from domestic politics, and no threat from the international politics.
You just mentioned that judiciary, of course, we have seen the kind of pattern they've developed over the years by their decisions regarding very sensitive matters over there in India. It gives us a picture that it remains clearly to be biased. What about media? I mean, it has got certain responsibility to highlight the issues of utmost significance before the public at large. So after these shocking revelations, why do you think media remains to be silent? Because there are voices from the opposition Congress party also, specifically when we talk about the Congress, one of the top leaders, Mr. Shashi Tharoor, also saying that India can't claim to be a democracy with a free press when this particular revelation is not taken up by the most of the channels over there.
Actually, one reason for this success is the weakness of the Indian opposition. And what to talk of Indian opposition? The most strong opposition party, Congress, look what is happening to them. Even this Rahul Gandhi has been sort of thrown out of the parliament. So I don't think Pakistan's stance is valid. It reminds me of a saying, perhaps a Japanese saying is translated to English, that though it's written, don't pluck these flowers, but the wind cannot read. So unless the wind learns to read, these disasters and these violence, these violations of human rights will continue. We can sort of regret all this. We can sort of try to wake up international community's conscience about it. But unfortunately, although I'm an optimist, but I don't see this happening in near future.
Right. Mr. Amir, the role and the responsibility of media in a country which claims to be the largest democracy, the voices coming from the opposition parties, including the Congress also, about the kind of role Indian media has played after these shocking revelations by the former governor of IIOJK. Is it because that the media over there in India is afraid because of that fascism and those policies which have been carried out by the Hindutva-driven brigade over there? As we have seen the kind of crackdown which was carried out against the international organizations, including the Amnesty and even BBC also.
You're right, because the Indian media is heavily supported by international corporate sector as well. The corporate sector which is linked to Hindutva ideology, because this is a branding for them. India is a big market for international corporate, more than 1 billion of people living there. So they are using the Hindutva brand to make money out of that. So that is one aspect where media is also following that. The media houses which go against it will go bankrupt soon. So this is economic might as well. Secondly, if you look at the international media watch agencies, they have already named Modi as the predator of freedom of press. So he's a predator. The predatory Indian state is actually trying to tie the noose around those who are critical of Indian Hindutva ideology. And look at the case of Rana Ayub, for example, and many other journalists who were tortured, who were publicly ashamed, who were stigmatized by the Hindutva thugs in the streets, and they were threatened everywhere. So those who have courage, like Arundhati Roy and many others, who have courage to speak out, were stigmatized and were threatened and were considered as traitor. So this is a political situation, because journalists, as an independent journalist, needs an ecosystem, an enabling environment to work, and also there's some space to be expressive about things. Like journalists like Kuldeep Nair, who was very rational, was also blamed by Hindutva, and BJP. And before that, in Mumbai, this there was another thug, I think Bal Thackeray and his party. They also threatened many journalists. So this situation was growing for many decades. Now, unless there is an international, international sanctions on India, which will again be a big call today, because the all international corporate, as Abbasi well said, there is an international game as well. So Western powers see India as a counter, as a countervailing force against the rising China. So there is a support in international diplomatic circles as well. But I think the most important thing to happen is the Indian, civil society, Indian minorities, and those who champion the freedom of press and the legal, those who have legal fraternity and those who are progressive, must come forward to start a movement and build petition. That is the only way forward, I think.
Right. Dr. Asma, so let me talk specifically about Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir. The Indian authorities, especially after the revocation of Article 370, said this revocation was done to carry out that very much development work over there in IIOJK. What is the situation right now? Those claims, were they true, or the situation or the reign of terror that has increased over the number of years since that very revocation? We have seen cordon search operations, extrajudicial killings happening also, and then the domicile certificates being distributed to non-Kashmiris over there to fulfill its nefarious design of changing the demography of the disputed territory as per the United Nations.
Right now, if we see what is happening in illegally Indian occupied Jammu and Kashmir, the region is suffering from Indian state-sponsored terrorism carrying out by its military forces, armed forces, government-backed armed forces, definitely, because we know that Indian occupied Kashmir is one of the most heavily militarized region of the world, where there is 900,000 Indian military forces are deployed there on ground. So if the security situation is improved or things are better, then what is the point to keep 900,000 military soldiers on a Kashmiri soil? Then the second thing is that if the economic situation of Indian occupied Kashmir is getting better, then why Kashmir is the region with the highest unemployment ratio under Indian setting? It is the more in Kashmir, the unemployment ratio is the highest among all Indian states. Then there is a continuous decline in Kashmir's economy. And because government use economic terrorism as a tool to subjugate Kashmiri Muslims, government has this policy, the Modi government, under Modi government, the Kashmir policy of that regime has this trend to destroy the livelihood of Kashmiris, destroying the orchards, destroying the crops, destroying homes, areas, regions. So that is not helping in any way to improve the economy of illegally Indian occupied Kashmir. And if we see the statistics, they substantiate what I am saying. Then comes the socio-political situation. We all know that it is not only in Indian occupied Kashmir but all over India that freedom of speech does not exist. Anyone who speaks truth, that he is being targeted by Hindutva fascists and extremists, and they try to make example out of him. So and same with even harder tone applies in Kashmir, and we have seen that how during past few years famous Kashmiri journalists or anyone who speaks about Kashmir and the plight of innocent Kashmiris, he's been targeted by the state institutions in India. So this is the scenery. This reminds me, I would recommend the book written by Anuradha Bhasin, who she wrote that after the revocation of Article 370, how things are getting worse in illegally Indian occupied Jammu and Kashmir. She is from Jammu, so she is from she shared the on ground situation with the academic narrative to the international community.
Right,
So we
Dr.
have
Asma.
to,
So, if this situation after the revocation of Article 370 has worsened even more, and there are blatant human rights violations being carried out by the Indian authorities, its occupation forces over there, we have seen there has been an indigenous freedom struggle going on for many decades now in IIOJK. Now, especially after this revocation, when there is continuous suppression happening day in and day out, what options do you think happen to be at the hands of the Kashmiris who are living in one of the largest open-air prisons in the world?
Yes, this is what Arundhati Roy said, that Kashmir is the largest prison of the world, and world during quarantine was so suffocated during COVID quarantine and they should realize that how Kashmiris are quarantined by Indian oppressive regime for last 76 years. And the situation, the options in the hands of Kashmiris are definitely continue with their struggle, continue with their basic demand, right to self-determination, which has been accepted, acknowledged, approved by the United Nations Security Council, and this resolution legitimized Kashmir's freedom struggle. So one thing that Kashmiris should not, they do not bend in front of the subjugation, oppression, and force of Indian coercive and punitive measures of Indian occupying forces in Jammu and Kashmir. The second thing is politically they should be vocal. Politically, Kashmiris should outreach international forums, which they are reaching, and keep registering their reservations and their pain. The third thing is, as a student of international politics, I believe the pain of Kashmiris has not reached to the international community in a correct manner. Kashmiris needs to write stories of their pain and oppression and all the trauma they are passing through for last 76 years. That should be documented. They need to document the victims and the biggest genocide of contemporary era, Jammu genocide, which caused the deaths of millions of Muslims only in a small region called Jammu. So that pain should be documented. Those martyrs should be documented, and all the Kashmiris who laid their lives during last 76 years for the freedom of Kashmir, their stories not only should be documented, but should reach to the outer world. There should be online archives of those stories and those victims and those heroes who laid their lives, but they did not accept the oppressor. They did not accept what oppressors wanted them to say. And why?
Right, your point is well taken. Dr. Asma Shakir Khawaja, Executive Director, Center of International Strategic Studies, Azad, Jammu and Kashmir, joining us on Skype. We really appreciate your time for being with us on Views on News tonight. Mr. Abbasi, one very quick take. We're unfortunately short of time. The options at the hands of Kashmiris after that continuous suppression that has been going on for over the number of decades now. A couple of things mentioned by Dr. Asma also. Let's talk specifically about registering their woes before the international community. What about the idea of holding referendums, symbolic referendums on the lines the way the Sikhs are carrying out around the world in the major capitals?
So this is what the diaspora can do it. Like the Sikh diaspora is doing this all over the world. Canada, Britain, and wherever they are in significant number. So that option is there, but she is very right in saying that Kashmiris have to keep tolerating these brutalities and yet keep the flag of independence and Kashmir flying high. I salute them. I remember Sayyid Gilani Sahab, who for many years did not get an Indian passport because in the form he had to fill in nationality as Indian. He said, I am not Indian. I belong to a state which is independent and which wants to be a part of Pakistan. So that kind of sacrifice has occurred. And since you asked me a question, let me remind that just few days back, an ex-MPA was shot, and he had predicted, his brother had predicted, that these guys will take us out of the jail and get us shot. And this is exactly what happened. So these things will go on, and the flag of freedom has to be kept flying.
Right. Mr. Amir, I would have loved to take in your view regarding this one as well, but unfortunately I'm short of time. I'll have to end the show over here right now. Thank you very much for being with us on the show, Mr. Amir Hussain, Senior Journalist, and Air Commodore Retired Basit Raza Abbasi, Senior Analyst. Really appreciate your precious time for being with us on Views on News tonight. With that, we come to the end of today's show. Till the next one, take good care of yourselves.